Hey guys, so this is finally the third part of my bookshelf tour. The third row of my bookshelf has classics on the left-hand side for the first 3 bays, then some poetry and some plays, and on the end is my tiny little sci-fi and fantasy section. This is the first bay of my classics, and it's actually the only one which is properly double stacked. So starting on the left here, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and then I've got 4 Ray Bradbury's. I know that most of these don't really fit properly in the classics section, but this is where I had space on my shelf, so this is where they're going. Fahrenheit 451, which I've obviously read and is one of my all-time favourite books. And then I've got 3 which I haven't read, starting with R is for Rocket, then The October Country, and Something Wicked This Way Comes. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which I've read and hated, but I love this Penguin English Library cover. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. A Town Like Alice by Neville Shute, which doesn't actually have the title on the front cover or on the spine. I think there used to be like a little cloth thing here that peeled off, but I know what's inside, so that's all that counts. Candide by Voltaire, translated by John Butt. Seriously, how am I supposed to not laugh at that? Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Cry the Beloved Country by Alain Patton or something. This teeny tiny fantastic essay, Politics and the English Language by George Orwell. Metamorphosis and Other Stories by Franz Kafka in this absolutely gorgeous Penguin Modern Classics. Maurice by E.M. Forster, and another Kafka. This one is The Trial in this gorgeous but ever so slightly broken book. Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. And lucky last, my incredibly beaten up and terribly water damage of E.M. Forster's A Room with a View, which is probably my favourite all-time classic. Absolutely adore this one. So behind that front stack is this little collection of Agatha Christie, and I haven't read any of these. I am aware that sounds vaguely ridiculous, but I promise I didn't pay for any of these. My grandparents were going out and cleaning out their little library and they said, would you like some free books? And I'm pretty sure you can figure out what my answer was. I am stoked to read this though because I've heard obviously amazing things about Agatha Christie. She's pretty much the queen of mystery writing. I'm not going to go through and show you all the covers for these ones because it seems a bit silly when I haven't read any of them and they're really well distributed and really well known books, but the covers for these are so ridiculous, it's amazing. Like, I have a thing for really cheesy covers and these take the cake. My absolute favourite one is The Labours of Hercules, which looks like this. Yeah, all the covers have like lots of different components on it which seem like stock images, and I'm sure once you've actually read the book they make some sense, but at the moment this looks like it's about death, a mean smoking lady, a robot bird, and a bloody apple. Pretty excited to read this one. So that is my first shelf of classics. Onto the second one. The obvious outlay here is this big one just on the end here. This is my incredibly chunky but gorgeous hardback of Les Mis by Victor Hugo. This book is gigantic and I'm under no impression that I'll be reading it anytime soon, but a lot of the paperbacks I saw had really tiny font, and I know that if I'm going to slug through like 1,000 pages of a book, I want it to at least be readable. So this huge one, which is making my arms really hurt to carry it, still has small font obviously, but much more readable. So when I do have time to read this one, I'll actually be able to read it without a magnifying glass, which sounds cool. Starting in the middle we have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which I really hate, but this is the first book that I ever bought overseas, so I have this dumb emotional connection to it and I can't bring myself to throw it out, even though it makes me angry to look at it. Evil and Wars, A Handful of Dust, which is absolutely falling apart. John Wyndham, The Seeds of Time. The Diamond as Big as the Ritz and Other Stories by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I love this little geometric design on the front there. Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. The Chrysalids by John Wyndham in one of the best/worst covers ever. Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. 100 Great Books in Haiku by David Bader. On the Road by Jack Kerouac. A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, and Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I absolutely love A Room of One's Own. It's one of the first essays that I read, I guess, not in an academic sense, and I loved it, but I seriously cannot get past more than like 5 pages into Mrs. Dalloway. I've used it several times when I can't seem to get to sleep, read the first 5 pages and I'm out like a light. The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest, both by Oscar Wilde. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Grimm's Fairy Tales, and then Hans Christian Andersen's as well. And at the bottom, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Over over on the right here, we've got Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, as well as Vile Bodies, which is probably one of my favourite covers that I've got in my collection, and it's an absolute travesty that I have not read this one yet. It's definitely on the list. And the last three books are Sherlock Holmes, so I have The Son of Four, Study in Scarlet, which is the first Sherlock Holmes book, and this version has this awesome illustration of these guys doing what looks to be a pretty cool dance on the cover, so seal of approval for that. And the Sherlock Holmes Handbook, which is sort of like half encyclopedia, half trivia guide about Sherlock Holmes, which is cool enough, but it's actually written by Ransom Riggs, who wrote the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, which I guess is even cooler. And my last lot of classics, starting on the left, there is this little adorable copy of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which I hated reading, but I think this is really, really cute, so I'm hoping that eventually I'll forget how much I hated reading it and go back to give this another try, because look how adorable this pocket edition is. Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, which I haven't actually read, but I watched the animated movie of it when I was a kid, so close enough, right? To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, which I really wanted to love, but this is one of the most boring books that I have ever read. In the middle, I've got my little collection of the vintage red spines, starting with Dracula, The Beautiful and the Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which has another gorgeous cover, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, because for some reason I own 2 copies of a book that I despise, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, which, if I'm honest, I bought mainly because there is an episode of Sabrina the Teenage Witch in which she reads this a lot. Yeah, I'm pretty easily influenced. 1984 by George Orwell, and this is probably my favourite physical book that I own because it's just so gorgeous. I mean, it's got the slogans from the book on the front, the spine even is pretty, and it has Down with Big Brother on the back, and really that's all you need to know about this iconic book. In comparison to that, Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, which is an example of the most mind-numbingly boring book design that I've ever seen. Walden by Henry David Thoreau, The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. I read this a couple of years ago and absolutely loved it. And Animal Farm by George Orwell with a beautiful picture of old Georgie on the back. Tender is the Night in this beautiful hardback Penguin Classics, because of course I have 4 F. Scott Fitzgerald books, and of course none of them matching cover design. And my very last classic, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is my little bay of plays and poetry. Lots of these I haven't read yet because I really just started getting into poetry in the last couple of months, really, which is why this is such a teeny tiny section of my bookshelf. I also do want to point out there's a couple of books where the text on the spine is upside down, but I can promise you those books are definitely facing the right way. I don't know what I did to publishers, but I feel like they have a vendetta against me because that really, really annoys me when the lettering on the spine is upside down. The first one at the top here is this teeny tiny book. This is the complete plays of William Shakespeare in one sitting. So it just has like the characters in the play and gives you like a rough summary, and I think it's stinking adorable. And the next 3 are also Shakespeare books. I got these for like $1 when Borders was closing. I don't think they're condensed books. They do say they're pocket editions, but I don't think they're condensed versions of the plays. So there's Love's Labour's Lost, The Taming of the Shrew, and The Tempest. Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, which I'll be honest, I bought almost entirely based on the Dead Poets Society. One of the annoying upside down books. This is Tennyson's In Memoriam. I don't know if you can see it, but it has this gorgeous sort of like embossed cover on the front, and it's so pretty. Another copy of The Taming of the Shrew because I think this little vintage cover is just adorable. The Apple Cart by Bernard Shaw. 4 Plays by A.O. Milne, where the dust jacket is in really terrible condition, but the actual book itself is in gorgeous condition. 2 plays by Tennessee Williams, Cat in the Hot Tin Roof and The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore. Some more Shakespeare, because I can't get enough. Richard III, As You Like It, and Julius Caesar. The selected poems of E.E. Cummings from 1923 to 1958, and the selected poems of T.S. Eliot. Tom Stoppard's play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, Ted Hughes's Birthday Letters, Super Ugly Shakespeare, this one's Macbeth, His Name in Fire by Catherine Bateson, The Little World of Elves and Fairies, which is an anthology, Classic Favourite Poems, which is another anthology of poetry, and Lucky Last by Boy Shakespeare, this one's Hamlet. This cover I think is actually pretty ugly, but it's the one which I used when we studied Hamlet in high school, and I kept this one because it has all like my little sarcastic comments in it and sad faces when someone died, and I really couldn't get rid of this one. And finally, this is the last cube on the shelf, which has my very, very small sci-fi and fantasy section in it. The lighting is going to be really dodgy for this one because it's so far away from my window, so I get no natural light, so it's all going to be harsh artificial light, which matches the harsh tone of the sci-fi books. Right? Starting up the very top, I have the first 2 books in the Sookie Stackhouse series by Charlene Harris. This first one is Dead Until Dark,
And the next one is Living Dead in Dallas. Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. The Gathering by Isabel Carmody, which is a fantastic book that deeply scarred me for many, many years. And a Red Dwarf omnibus, which has Red Dwarf and Better Than Life in it. Wool by Hugh Howey. The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I don't know how much it shows up on the video, but this was an absolutely gorgeous cover when I first got it, and then I got it very, very slightly wet in my bag, and all of this design along here and up the top here has started peeling off. So yeah, thanks HarperCollins, good work. A bind-up of the 5 Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books by Douglas Adams, which I have read the first 2.5 of. Also by Douglas Adams, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. Battlefield Earth by L. Ron Hubbard, which is a book that I'm almost definitely never going to read. And I bought it honestly for the funny factor because it's by L. Ron Hubbard and look how thick it is. I'm never going to read this book. Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which is one of the best books I have ever read. And The Graveyard Book, also by Neil Gaiman. Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, because Blade Runner is one of the best movies ever made. Eragon by Christopher Paolini, because Eragon is one of the worst movies ever made. Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion in the film cover, so let's not look at this anymore. And last one, The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. And that is finally the third shelf of my bookshelf tour.